My name is Ian McKnight. I work with Ben and Kyle on the State Oversight Academy. And what I've been working on for for approximately a little over a year is our People-Centered Oversight project. Today, this is the first time that that what we've been calling PCO is making it out into the world. We've been working on this for about a year, and we spend a lot of time thinking about oversight at the Levin Center, obviously, and we wanted to zoom in and look specifically at how oversight includes people. People on the front lines, the implementers of programs, the people who are typically on the receiving end of programs. And we had two great research assistants to help out with this, Jen and Zuki, both of whom are PhD students here at Wayne State University. Jen has since graduated, and Zuki, I think, is moving into her second or third year. And today, I am so excited to show you all the result of all this work. It is available on our website and as a downloadable PDF starting today. It may not be on the top of your beach read list this summer, but there are 2 months to go. There's plenty of time. And we've really done our best to produce something that we think is pretty readable and applicable to you, whether you're a legislator, a scholar, or someone who is just interested in oversight. What we have is not quite academic of the same quality that we've just been looking at. You won't see any formulas or anything of that nature, but we really think it's a good resource on how states are doing things and how they can be done better. So in honor of this auspicious occasion, we have set aside an hour today, perhaps a little bit more, but we'll make sure to get you to lunch on time, to talk about people-centered oversight. So our plan now is this. Over the next half hour, I'm going to talk about our report, people-centered oversight as an idea, what it means, and why we think it's important. We'll talk about the general shape of people-centered oversight in the United States today. And then I'll briefly go through 3 of our case studies with you. You've already heard from Megan Rickman Blackwood this morning in her inspiring talk, and she'll be joining us in a few, at the end of this presentation as well, to tell us a little bit more about her work. And we also are really lucky to have David Kirchner from the Office of the Legislative Auditor in Minnesota. They are both subjects of our case studies, and I'm really excited for them to share some details about their work with you all. Before we do that, we'll also review some of the recommendations we included in this report, which offer some pretty manageable ways for making people-centered oversight a more central part of legislatures, for both folks at the broader institutional level recommendations, and then for legislators and staff as well. So, why focus on people-centered oversight in the first place? And we start a lot of our presentations around here with this chart. And we start our report on people-centered oversight with the same troubling fact. We know that trust in government and also trust in democracy is historically low. The reasons for this, as you all know, are very complicated, and there are a lot of factors that go into that. But we start our work on PCO rooted in one idea: that government must prove it can achieve its goals, keep its promises, and noticeably improve the lives of the people whom it serves in order to earn their trust. And there are places we can improve on that front. We can deliver better, faster, and simpler digital services. We can build and maintain better infrastructure. We can improve care practices and outcomes for vulnerable people in the care of the state. And the list goes on and on. And those improvements, we know, can build trust. Senator Levin said it best: people haven't rejected the goals of our programs, but they have begun to reject the claim that our programs have anything to do with our goals. And this brings us to a fundamental question, which is, are our programs achieving our goals? Are they delivering for people? Are housing programs delivering great housing for people to live in? Are healthcare programs delivering healthcare to people who need it? and our transportation programs, getting people where they need to go. And do the people who are served by those programs agree? Oversight can answer these questions, but it doesn't always. So we arrive at this concept of PCO, people-centered oversight. PCO is not some grand unified practice. It is a constellation of practices that help orient oversight toward, the term we use is end users. An end user is a term we borrow from the tech world that describes people on the receiving ends of a program or service. This allows us, and you'll hear me say end user a lot, the end user language allows us to use language that's a little bit broader than the typical terms that we use for program recipients. So rather than saying taxpayer or passenger or patient or inmate, we'll use the term end user today, and you'll see that in the report as well. People-centered oversight is fundamentally about moving away from a mentality of what did the bureaucracy do, and toward what are the needs and experiences of people being served. You may well ask, isn't all oversight people-centered? And certainly that's an argument you could make. You can say, yes, if we're looking at the financial statements of a program, we have to understand the financial statements if we are to serve people. And I think that's absolutely right. But we can also make it a little more explicit and do more to include the perspectives of people on the front lines of policy implementation, those implementers and those end users. So rather than focusing oversight merely on compliance, we can move to outcomes and deliver better service. The two key principles in this, and you'll see these throughout the program today, are emphasizing outcomes by engaging with people who experience government services firsthand, particularly program beneficiaries, those end users, and frontline workers responsible for delivering programs. So line rather than staff, if we're going in civil service terms. And second is transforming oversight by strengthening feedback loops between legislators, program implementers, and the public, ensuring that oversight is more of a dialogue rather than a one-way evaluation. That's not necessarily new for us. We talk a lot about that. If you've ever been to one of our trainings, that will sound very familiar. In all of this, we're informed by the belief that the work of legislating is fundamentally an information problem. That taking in better information from better sources about more relevant aspects of programs can produce better oversight, better legislative action, better legislative results, and trust. So, I, of course, would love to tell you that this is our magical solution to fixing all of government and democracy and oversight. I think things are probably more complicated than that. I know things are more complicated than that. I do think that the practices we look at here offer a path to better service delivery for end users and better trust in government for everyone. So, here's what we did. First, we looked at oversight practices in all 50 states, and we did it with an eye toward how they center program users and implementers. We did lots and lots of reading through meeting minutes and watching videos of meetings and looking at news reports and reading through audits. In some cases, we made phone calls to staff in various states, particularly to ask about their implementation of back-end computer systems, which we'll talk about later on. And then we compiled all this information in state-by-state summaries, which I won't touch on in this presentation, but you can find them in the report. And those outline people-centered oversight adjacent practices in every state. And then we summed up the information in a national context. We call this the state of PCO. I'm going to review this very shortly. We put together a few case studies on Megan Rickman Blackwood's proactive case theory, on people-centered program evaluation in Minnesota, which you'll hear about later on, and about human-centered design in Michigan for public benefits applications. And we don't have the folks from Sevilla, the contractor that worked on that with us today, but we did a previous panel with them that you can also find on our website. Finally, we put together some recommendations to move in the direction of many of the best practices that we found. So we'll discuss all of this during our program today. So what is the state of people-centered oversight? We have a few key findings here. First, and perhaps most obviously, people-centered oversight depends on good oversight in the first place. This is a truth we found ourselves reckoning with over and over and over again. People-centered oversight sets a really high bar for engaging with the public, strengthening feedback loops, and enhancing oversight generally. And that is an especially high bar to clear if oversight isn't happening in a meaningful way to begin with. I will not call out specific states and chambers here, but you can read our report. And we also do a lot of citing the Levin Center sponsored 50-state study from 2019, which gets really into where and why oversight happens and doesn't happen. And you can read about, hundreds of pages of institutional characteristics state by state. It's really interesting stuff. The key determinants of whether oversight is happening generally involve institutional capacity, of course. That professionalization we heard about earlier certainly plays a role. But also, a lot of it is cultural. How do legislators and staff relate to auditors is a really big one. Is the oversight committee an idea of something that exists theoretically on a website, or does it meet every Wednesday morning? These are big predictors. And those things really matter. So this will sound familiar to many of you. This has been our typical Levin Center soapbox on it's really important to do good oversight in the first place. But let's move to a few PCO-specific practices. And the top of this section, there's a lot of doom and gloom, but there's good stuff too. We'll get there. So second, most attempts at PCO through public hearings tend to fall short. And when you think about people-centered oversight, probably this seems like the low-hanging fruit where you put people in front of an oversight committee with a public hearing, and now you have people-centered oversight. And it turns out it is not that simple. Different institutions have different rules about testimony. Sometimes it's a routine required part of meetings. Sometimes committees allow written testimony or spoken testimony only under certain circumstances. Sometimes there's a general lack of public hearings. But even where public testimony is a routine part of meetings, there is very little evidence that more than a small handful of people take advantage of the opportunity to testify. And there's little evidence that committees use that public testimony to meaningfully inform their oversight efforts on a routine basis. A fundamental truth that feeds into this is that Americans don't really make a habit of testifying before state legislative committees. Certainly, there is a rational choice theory way to explain this, but we can all agree for our purposes that really it's a pain to testify before a committee. If you are an ordinary American, it involves going to the Capitol. Often state capitals are a very great distance away. Usually it's on a work day. Probably you have to dress up. We spend a lot of time at state capitals on our team, and if our experience of the nation's state capitals is anything to go by, probably the parking situation is completely enraging, and you get the idea. Testifying is a pain, so people don't do it. The exception to this is if there's a really hot-button issue where someone has been particularly wronged by a program in a terrible way. And it can be helpful to hear from people in those circumstances, but it isn't a comprehensive plan for understanding program implementation. You can't rely on public testimony alone to close information gaps because you're more likely to hear from people who have had negative experiences. No one is going to testify because they thought that their wait at the DMV was so pleasantly short, and isn't it wonderful that they take American Express now instead of just MasterCard and Visa. You're not hearing from those folks in committee testimonies. There's a bias toward extremes, to people who feel very strongly, often rightfully so, about an issue, but might not reflect the experience of most users. Our next finding, web forms are an increasingly popular way to solicit information from the public. The results are mixed. Perhaps trying to get around some of those public testimony issues, a lot of chambers and committees are getting into web forms. And I'm not referring to the classic, contact your legislator forms, but there's a newer variety we're seeing that is asking people to send in information about a particular program or tell us where there's government waste. We saw a lot of this at a committee level during the recent DOGE push. With some exceptions, and one of those is South Carolina, which does a really good job uh, of collecting user information on programs as part of this rolling oversight process. We also have a panel discussion with them. With some exceptions, these are kind of flash in the pan type tools, or they appear to be to us. It's really unclear where the information they receive goes in many cases, and often the committee can lose interest. And these forms are also open to manipulation. So there was a story in one state, and I'm forgetting which one, but they had a form of this nature, and it just got absolutely filled with people, I think, sending in the scripts to the B movie, the entire script. So it did not last long. So those are web forms. More broadly, there are inconsistencies in and gaps in digital infrastructure that are hindering progress across the board on oversight. This is as much cultural as it is digital. You can have digital tools, and if the culture is not to use them, they don't go very far. Legislatures generally do a really great job of bill information and having bill information online. As things became increasingly digital in state governments in the last half century, bill information is kind of the low-hanging fruit. They're numbered. They move through a steady process. It's pretty easy to program. Oversight information can be a little bit tougher to classify, and you wind up with situations where reports are on websites that don't belong to the institution, or they belong to a caucus or a particular legislator. They get lost. People are not keeping committee websites updated, depending on the state, or websites are just tough. State legislative websites for most people who do not regularly deal with legislatures, and some of them for people who do regularly deal with legislatures, can be really tough to deal with. There are some rough legislative websites out there. Another area we found gaps in digital infrastructure was in casework data tracking. We'll talk about this as we continue here. But casework data is a really valuable tool for people-centered oversight. When we called legislative chambers around the country and talked to staff, mostly in IT, to see if they had standardized systems for this, and we found, number one, that a minority of chambers use these systems, but number two, that people often have a difficult time getting everyone on their staff to use casework data tracking systems. So it can be tough to get consistent data logged across the board. In one state, Tennessee, they had a system for logging casework data, but the rates of use were so low that they ended up going back to their old system, which perhaps involves sticky notes. I'm not sure. We'll talk more about casework later on. You're going to hear so much about casework today. All of this, so these are sort of the grim bullet points. There is good news. People-centered oversight is still happening in corners across all of government. Systems for gathering and working with casework data are improving, just in terms of ease of use and in terms of what they can do and their implementation. Government is catching on to human-centered design, which is great for service delivery. And lots of legislative work already lends itself to people-centered oversight, this being the people's branch, after all. There are town halls, there's casework, auditors are doing field work. Great things are happening. And opportunities for people-centered oversight are expanding too. Tech makes it easier to engage, and when it's done right, you can open up the door to testimony over long distances and save the difficult parking situation. It's easier to get information from executive agencies, and a lot of that is now available in open data as well, which makes it possible for interested citizens and for the media to engage with data, often on program implementation and performance, and to draw conclusions from it. Tools like AI are making it easier to engage with the fundamental challenge of people-centered oversight and oversight generally, which is that taking in tons of information and drawing effective conclusions from it is really challenging, especially when you're working in a legislative environment with limited resources. So how does all this good stuff play out in practice? We look at 3 case studies, and I'll just sort of breeze through these here because you'll hear about them more in a few minutes. First, I want to talk about Megan's proactive casework theory, which you've heard about before, and you will hear about it again. Casework is oversight. That is its really important role. Of course, it's good politics, but it's really great oversight. It has a long history in American legislative tradition. John Quincy Adams, when he was in the House of Representatives, was sending letters back and forth to figure out people's postal appointments and their military pensions and all of that. Casework goes way back. And it also helps the legislature to understand executive branch program implementation and puts them in a better position to oversee and legislate on those programs. It reveals issues, changes, trends, and snags in existing programs. Casework often is part of some kind of service failure, so it's a really great opportunity for the legislature to see what's going wrong. And data from casework, when it's collected responsibly, is really valuable oversight input. That's why we talk so much about the importance of tools to collect casework data. You lose out on a lot when you are running a casework program off of sticky notes next to the phone. But casework data is similar to hearings. It only reflects the people who go to the trouble of contacting a legislator, either because they're desperate or because they're in the habit of contacting their legislator, which may not be a demographic that's completely reflective of the district. So the information they produce is still flawed. What we love about what Megan and David Ortlicker are working on is that they answer the question, what if you reversed it? What if your legislator contacted you? You all heard about this in the last session. The lightning round, for those of you who are just joining, is that the legislator, or more likely volunteers, reach out to people to see if they have a casework request. They can use targeting tools to make it easy to build lists that help fill these gaps. It really does require a robust system to collect and analyze data, but that data can feed into broader oversight efforts and reveal where people might be experiencing issues in government. In a few moments, we'll also hear from David Kirchner from Minnesota, who will tell us about their use of people-centered data in formal program evaluation. I'll leave most of the details to him, but just a quick overview. Legislatures use formal oversight partners or analytic offices or analytic bureaucracies, if we're being maximally academic, like auditors to see what's going on with programs. These are a lot more, of course, than accountants with green visors doing financial audits. And we're big fans here of program or performance evaluation, which has this emphasis on operational performance and service delivery and outcomes and a lot more. That really lends itself to people-centered work. And we just love what they're doing in Minnesota, where they will include components in their evaluations where they talk to end users and program implementers. So if your kid is at the DMV taking their driver licensing test, you might be approached by someone from the Minnesota OLA who will ask you, how was your experience scheduling this today? They run surveys of incarcerated people in state prisons, which have all these methodological and ethical challenges. You're going to hear about this soon. And a lot of that, of course, there's a lot of challenging methodology that goes into it, and a lot of it is also cultural. When I asked David how this became part of his office's process, he answered what many of the practitioners of oversight around the country who are doing the best tell us about their work, which is, well, this is how we've always done these reports. It just makes sense. You'll hear more from David in a few minutes, but there's the quick review. And finally, we have a less oversight-focused case study, but we wanted an example of what we stand to gain when we include people in government processes where they might not previously have been included. And for that, we turn to the Levin Center's own backyard in Detroit, to an organization called Civilla. And again, you can find our discussion with their CEO on our website. They were a design contractor for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And they designed a new version of this form, and you know it's a great form when it has a number. This is MDHHS-1171. And I have on the slide here, on the left side, the old version of Form 1171. Sevilla does such a good job of telling this story. The form contained 1,000 questions. It had more words than all of Shakespeare's Macbeth. It requested the date and city of conception for most people in a household under the age of 22. It was obviously built to maximize compliance and absolutely minimize risk. And it was used by about 1 million Michiganders every year to apply for public benefits. You can imagine what a pain this was and what the human cost of filling out and processing a form like this was. On the right-hand side is the new form, the Sevilla-produced form, and they used this wonderful user research process, which we get more into in the report. The result is, there's room to write your name, for example. The lines are larger. What is it like to write on the form, to process it? How are the questions phrased? How can we still comply with the rules while making it easier on everyone? It's not just beautiful. Most people complete it within 20 minutes. It takes 42% less time to process than the old. And it's made possible because they took user research really, really seriously. The form does all the same things as the old one, and to the same end, but the focus is on people. So those are our case studies. More on those in a few minutes. Whoops. And I'm going to share that again because it really did not care for my scroll wheel here. Give me just a moment. Screen shared. There we are. So I'll just talk a little bit about our recommendations before we get to the panel section. Number one, and we'll talk first about institutions. Watch out for institutional culture. Oversight, we know, can be predicted by levels of professionalism. Mostly it's a habit. If you have an institutional culture of conducting oversight and of including people, you will do a better job. Number two, consider the incentives your oversight creates, because oversight creates culture not only in the legislature, but in agencies. A practice of one-way oversight, really, it makes for, good television clips sometimes, and that's about it. It also creates a culture of risk aversion, and it creates forms that have as many words as all of Macbeth. So non-punitive dialogue around shared goals leads to better outcomes, and we discuss a few states that do a really good job of this. Adopting user-centered research and design practices, both in legislatures and in agencies, is really important. Changes to legislative computer systems. Bill tracking is great, but you can also do great work to make reports public and invest in unified computer systems that aren't separated by caucus or that sort of thing, where oversight reports and oversight actions are more readily available. You can make the public a more meaningful part of oversight, and that means a lot more than just hearings. It means touring facilities, directing analytic bureaucracies or oversight partners to take on more people-centered work. And there is a note of caution, of course, in defining the people. This is a classic question in American politics, of course, but it's so important to gather data from representative samples of the public or build mechanisms to do that, and to think carefully about how data collection can skew results or who has a voice in a particular issue. Finally, and we get a lot into what data sets are available in different states, you manage what you measure, and it pays to measure really thoughtfully. You can get a whole lot of data points in state government. If you're a legislator, you may find yourself in a position to request many of those data points. And we found a lot of open data across this country. Some of it is amazing and really lends itself to people-centered oversight. Some of it is quite crummy. It is really great to have open data sets that tell you about program implementation. How long is the wait time when you call the Board of Cosmetology licensing? It's like a nice, easy, all right, are people waiting for half an hour? Or are they getting picked up right away? It's less great when those open data sets are, what are the middle initials of the licensees from this particular board? That's out there. It's not that helpful. For legislators and staff, take casework seriously. It is more than just a political tool. Collect data and watch for trends. Be proactive in constituent outreach. Learn from Megan's work. We'll talk more about that. Develop systems to separate signal from noise when you're engaging with public concerns. Work to understand government government programs and how they're operated so that you can better distinguish between when a program has failed to deliver intended results and when it has issued a determination that a member of the public does not like. Those are often different circumstances. Draw a bright line between constituent casework and regular issue-based correspondence or advocacy campaigns. Get comfortable with artificial intelligence. Take the time to learn the practical details of how you can use AI to enhance your work without sacrificing data integrity and cybersecurity. That takes a lot of intentionality, but it is a really important thing for legislative institutions to be focusing on. And finally, remember that legislative work, the best legislative work, is people-centered from the start. It is the people's branch. It's been designed around people-centered work for 250 years. Get to know your constituents, visit facilities, ask questions, go to cookouts. All of legislative work begins and ends with people. After reading all those best practices, I am going to conclude this presentation with a worst practice, and I'm just going to read the end of the paper for you. We begin the conclusion with a quote from Robert Caro, who wrote a large series of biographies about Lyndon Johnson and also the Power Broker about Robert Moses in New York, both of which are frightening books. And then he wrote his own autobiography, which I think I read on one plane ride. It's pretty short, but I'll read just one section. There is evil and injustice that can be caused by political power, but there is also great good. It seems that people have forgotten this. They've forgotten, for example, what Franklin Roosevelt did, how he transformed people's lives, how he gave hope to people. Now people talk in vague terms about government programs and infrastructure, but they've forgotten the women of the Texas Hill Country and how electricity changed their lives. They've forgotten that when Robert Moses got the Triborough Bridge built in New York, that was infrastructure. And that one bridge created thousands of jobs. 31 million man-hours of work done in 20 states went into it. We certainly see how government can work to your detriment today, but people have forgotten what government can do for you. They've forgotten the potential of government, the power of government to transform people's lives for the better. And we end the report this way. Government should work, and it should work for the American people. It should be efficient, honest, and easy to deal with. It should achieve our goals. It should, in the words of Robert Caro, transform people's lives for the better. When we talk about government working, it's easy to fall into the habit of doing so in terms of the sort of inane mechanics that make up government in the 21st century: contracting, procurement, compliance, regulation, civil service rules, and on and on. And all those factors are important to making government work. And to most Americans with other things to worry about, they do not matter. What matters is implementation and outcomes, the real tangible effect government can have on their lives. If American democracy is to make a case for itself in our time, it must prove that it can deliver government that works. This is a tall order, but in an era of historically low trust in American government and democracy generally, it is an essential one. If we are to get it right, it will require not just changes to policy and to implementation of that policy, but a reorientation of legislative oversight toward the kinds of people-centered approaches we have outlined here. The stakes are high, but the good news is that this more responsive, experience-driven model of oversight has already spread its roots across the country. People-centered oversight happens every day. It happens when legislative staff record the details of a phone call on a computer. It happens when a program evaluator carves out a few extra days on a project for field work. It happens when legislators tour facilities or when agency analysts compile statistics on service delivery. PCO is already a part of legislative life across the country. What we need now is not to invent something entirely new, but to recognize the value of these practices and commit to them with greater intention. By building on what already works, institutionalizing what's often informal, and directing our oversight energy at experience and outcomes, we can strengthen the link between government and the people it serves. What we stand to gain is more than just improved government programs, but improved lives, and the proof that so many are craving that our democratic system is capable of listening, adapting, and delivering for people. So that's people-centered oversight. And I am so pleased now to welcome two good friends to the Levin Center here to join us. We have Megan Rickman Blackwood joining us again after her excellent appearance this morning. And I'm also so excited to welcome David Kirchner. David is an evaluation coordinator in his 19th year with the Minnesota Office of the Legislative Auditor. His work typically involves leading a team during a months-long deep dive into a topic chosen by a bipartisan legislative committee, culminating in the release of a detailed report with recommendations for agencies and the legislature. In the past decade, he has led evaluations on such diverse topics as home down payment assistance, light rail construction, ambulance services, child protection, prison security, K-12 standardized testing, highway spending priorities, and economic development incentives. Before joining OLA, he earned a PhD in political science from Washington University, St. Louis, and taught American politics and public policy at two Midwestern liberal arts colleges. And I can tell you from experience, he has those Midwestern liberal arts college professor editing skills to prove it. David and Megan, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to start just by asking you both to tell us a little bit about your work. We'll start with David, and I'm so interested, David, to hear about some of the history of your work with the folks we call end users. Take it away.
Well, thank you for that introduction. You just kind of talked about my work and then asked me to talk about it. So yes, I'll repeat a little bit of what you said. Our office is a legislative audit office or a legislative program evaluation office. We are the state version of what most people are familiar with at the federal level as the GAO, and many states have an office like ours. And I am on the program evaluation side of the office. So we do have a wing of our office that does financial auditing of state agencies, but my office is very much one that is, oh, you've just made me giant on screen. Okay, I'll have to get used to that. Let me see if I can get a different view up so I'm not just talking to myself. Okay. We are each year, there is a bipartisan commission of the legislature that oversees our work, that chooses topics for us to work on. And so we have every year a series of topics that we're asked to look at and provide a report to the legislature on those topics. And those can be anything that state government does or spends money on. And as Ian said, I've worked on a variety of different types of projects. It is typically the case that we are interested in trying to find out how well these programs that we're looking at are working for people. And so to that end, we are often asking ourselves as we put together our methodology, how can we get out and talk to people on the ground or see how the work is being done? As one example of that, I'm currently working on a project related to nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And earlier this month, I was shadowing inspectors as they were going through those facilities and watching what they were doing as part of our work to evaluate how well that state agency is protecting the interests of the people who live in those facilities. And that's, as I said, kind of a standard part of what we do. So I'll stop there because there's a lot of questions you have here, so I don't want to talk too long on any of them.
And I'll mention as well, the Q&A box for those of you joining us today is available at the bottom of your screen. And in the spirit of people-centeredness, we certainly invite you to send your questions, and we'll keep an eye on that too. Megan, I'll go to you next. We've already heard about your work, but for anyone who might have joined us in the last hour or so, tell us a little bit about proactive casework and how did you come to be interested in it? And I'll add also that we love Megan for many reasons, but especially because an academic focus on casework in state legislatures is really quite uncommon. So how did you get there?
Yeah, well, thank you, Ian. I love you guys too, so much. You made me cry a little bit there towards the end again. I'm just too emotional today. But nonetheless, so I mentioned that I had worked for a state legislator in Virginia, Senator Mamie E. Locke, and both in my own lived experience and then my time in her office, I saw how important casework was not only to the individual, one-on-one service delivery of fixing an issue for a constituent or getting an answer from an agency, but more broadly to informing policy, informing new legislation, and definitely informing oversight activity. I always thought of casework kind of as that canary in a coal mine. If I'm getting, particularly when I was working during COVID times, right? The unemployment calls, I knew what was wrong in the system before the agency called to tell us that a form had broken. Because I had 30 new calls about it, right? And we were keeping a spreadsheet and tracking this. Um, so for me, coming into grad school, casework was super obvious. It was something that I thought we would cover in like American Politics 101. It would be a quick like week and then we'd keep moving on. And I realized no one had taken a really serious look at casework since the 70s or 80s. And since then, and even in that time, the majority of it was member centered, definitely was federal centered. We do not have any information other than what I'm currently creating and the amazing work of Michelangelo. I was so excited to hear about that paper. The knowledge about state casework is being created right now, and it has never been touched before. And before I could even allow myself to start having some like grander theorizing, I realized that we needed to like reestablish that information. And then once I was in there, again, it just felt like an obvious thing, right? Like people are calling, they're getting this amazing experience, they're getting this amazing opportunity to rebuild their trust and see their government work for them hands on. And the more I learned about participation and knowledge and income and SES and civic skills, the more I realized like this is an amazing thing that not that many people know how to use. If they do know how to use it, not that many people are going to feel like confident enough in themselves to like make that call and ask for help. Um, and we could do it in a much easier way. Delegate Sam Rasool out of Virginia is who started the Democratic Promise program. When he told me about it, it sounded brilliant. I thought he had come up with this amazing thing that like never been done before. Dig into the literature, come to find out in the 80s when they had the adoption of long distance phone calls, this is something members did. They once they could make phone calls, they called random people in their district. And John A. Johannes founded in the 80s where they would call and just ask, how are you doing? Is there anything I can help you with? Is government messed up? Is there any programs you're having problems with? Um, so it's not this insane, novel, crazy, beautiful, shiny new theory. It's what's ad hoc happening across the country in pockets of like really brilliant people-centered representation. So to me, it was just pointing at something that was like, hey guys, why haven't we talked about this? But I don't know.
Great. Well, thank you. Um, and I've got a question for both of you now, which is sort of foundational in this whole thing. What do we gain when we bring more voices to the table, either through informal casework, through more formal program evaluation? And what are the challenges that come with that too? Because it's not all wine and roses. David, if you want to go first.
Sure. I mean, I think the obvious thing to me that is gained is that we're actually finding out whether the programs are serving the people that they're intended to serve. And if you're not asking that question at the, kind of the fundamental level, what are people getting out of them, then you're kind of missing the boat on what program evaluation should be, at least in my opinion. Now, There are significant methodological and logistical challenges that go along with that. And there are some ways in which we can't easily do that. There are some projects for which it's really hard to ask end users about stuff. I've done work on highway construction priorities and figuring out whether or not drivers are happy or not happy about construction projects. I mean, that's not a reasonable thing that that we can pursue very easily, given the resources that we have available and the time and so forth. So those are, we think about what people we think like, but it's kind of hard to ask those type of questions. On the other hand, there are other projects where we work on where there are very clear folks that have a lot of uh, ability to give us information, and those are people that we can go and talk to. For example, people that have been involved in the child protection system. I did a project on child protection, and we talked to attorneys that have worked on those types of cases. We talked to social workers that did stuff on the ground, and we were able even to talk to some youth that had previously themselves been involved in the child protection system and ask about their experiences. So those are things that we can reach out and do. But it is time consuming and it is difficult. And sometimes you don't have the resources that you need to do the kind of outreach that you would like to do in a perfect world. And so that's really often the biggest challenge is, okay, we have this amount of time and we have these amount of resources, and we have to scale back what we'd like to do to what we can do in the time available. Certainly, one of the things that has happened, I think, is that we have shifted because of resource constraints more and more to reaching out to people through technological means, through the internet. And that makes it more challenging to get into the voices of people who are not using the internet on a regular basis, or who are not typically involved in doing a lot of stuff on their computers. And that's something that we consistently try and figure out, are there new ways that we can do things that will get more input from folks? We did a project recently on people that use what's the word I want? It's a transportation program for people that have disabilities and medical needs. And many of these people are low-income folks, are seniors, and trying to, we tried to do a survey to those folks, but our response rate was very, very low. And so we ended up with a lot of information that was interesting from a kind of color, if you like, or kind of it was some quantitative stuff, but we were not able to get the kind of response that we would want in order to be able to actually draw firm conclusions about what people's experiences were. And so, we did the best we could with what we had, but sometimes those constraints of time and resources and energy and money limit what we can do from what we would like to.
Yeah. I think like David nailed it. The only thing I would add is even in that perfect world where you have all the time, all the resources in the world, I think Michelangelo spoke to this really well already, but both like hiring practices and then volunteering and engagement practices are super important for building the networks in which to develop the trust that people will feel comfortable coming to you to talk about an issue, and also that you have the right resources in your office to talk to the people that are coming to speak to you. Michelangelo, I think you might have cited both of these sources, but the two that I pulled, there's a great Butler and Brockman study from 2011 where they sent requests to offices under different ethnically coded names, right? And the response rates were different based on demographic matching, right? And then we have Gross in 2007 who found that constituents feel more comfortable reaching out to someone who has shared demographics to them, right? So nurturing, whether it be an office or an agency, nurturing relationships with your end users and making sure that they feel comfortable communicating any challenges and stuff is really important, right? Because you can, you mentioned it in the report, Ian, but you can offer them a seat at the table via an online form or a actual oversight hearing, right? But unless you have made them comfortable enough to feel like their voice is going to be heard and respected and acted on in that space, you're going to get a lot of B movies.
And actually, if I could jump in and add a story in connection to that, because that we did a project looking at security in our state prison facilities. And one of the things that we made a point of doing when we visited these facilities was to visit during every shift, including the overnight shift. And it was amazing how when we did our interviews the next day, the officers and the staff that we were talking with, they knew that they're like, you came into the overnight shift. Nobody ever comes into the overnight shift. And the fact that we had done that, I'm not sure how much information we gained by like walking around when a lot of prisoners were asleep, but the fact that we had been there had signaled to folks that we actually were interested in learning about the experiences that people had at all times of the day in prisons. And I think it meant that we got a lot richer conversation from our interviews in the following days when we were at those prisons than we would have had we not showed up and did that, because we had demonstrated our interest and our interest in listening and really understanding what was going on.
That leads me to, and I'll ask this for both of you, um, in your experience, and this may vary widely across your different experiences, but how do people respond to more proactive processes like this, where you are, you know, going to visit the folks on the night shift, calling people on their phones rather than waiting for them to call you? Do people appreciate that difference? Are they skeptical at first? How's the reception?
All of that. Right. Definitely the skepticalness. I think Laura spoke to that, right? It's anecdotal, right? But we talked about how hard it is to capture those variables. It's important qualitative findings that the person doing the calls felt like the majority of them gave her a what vibe first. I heard that from the trial in Virginia, as well as the other young ladies that were like running the trial in Nevada. So you got to get them to trust you enough to sell them on the trust. I think what David spoke to is really great, right? Like you get in the door, and then once you're in there, you stay overnight.
Yeah. And David, for you, I'm interested in the same thing. I mean, are people so, is your reception, we're so glad you're here? Is it, oh my God, audit, did you say? It's somewhere in between?
Both, I would say. And the third thing is, wait a minute, who are you? I didn't know this office existed, right? I mean, and this goes back to what the earlier panelist, I'm sorry, is it David Ornblicker, is that the name, was saying about, many people have never heard of our office. People within state government often have heard of our office, and then it's like, oh God, it's the auditor. But for people outside of state government, the idea that there is an entity that is basically evaluating state agencies is to them often a surprise that our office even exists. And so, as I said, when I was recently shadowing folks at nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and we would explain why we were there. And we're like, well, these people are here to inspect you. We're here to inspect them. And they were, the folks at the facilities were kind of like, well, that's really cool. We didn't know that, was even a thing that happened, right? But it is true that having the word auditor in the name of our office is a little bit of a hurdle when we introduce ourselves, because that's not people's first reaction to interacting with an auditor. Is they're not expecting a positive experience. So we do have to work around that. The other thing I will note is that we have an advantage that I'm sure most academics would kill to have, which is by state law, every public employee has to give us the information that we ask for. That proves useful, as you might expect.
And I think you mentioned that applies to anyone receiving public funds too in Minnesota. Is that
That's
correct?
correct. Anybody who works for any level of government aside from federal and tribal government, and anybody who is receives public funds is required by law to cooperate with the inquiries of our office and to provide us with whatever data that we request, regardless of its data classification. Now, that comes with it a tremendous amount of responsibility that our office has to be responsible in how we use that power and to be very, very secure in how we use data, because our office collects data from all kinds of different agencies, from human services to corrections to education, and all of those are very sensitive pieces of data, and so we have extraordinarily strict data protocols. One of them being, by the way, that we don't trust Zoom. I am logged completely out of my state system, and I'm on a completely different computer because we are not allowed to be working and be on Zoom at the same time. That is a strict requirement in our office, and so I am not able to be connected to all of my other stuff unless I have a completely separate computer next to me that's not connected to the computer that's on Zoom.
Wow. Well, thank you for joining us for that. Despite the little drag with technology there, we appreciate it. Um, I I want to talk briefly about the logistics of both of your approaches. Um, Megan, proactive casework involves a huge increase in the number of constituent contacts and the volume of casework for a legislative office. Um, and I think the number, was it in Virginia that one test run, the increase in your contact rate was 5,000% over the prior period. Um,
I haven't run David's number yet, but
it's going to
I
be
mean,
up
there
there,
was
it
less
sounds
than
like.
10 and it's over 400, so
Okay, there you go. Yeah. How do you make sure people still get quality casework done with an increase like that? Uh,
um well, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I
no,
mean
that's please.
I spoke to it a little bit before, but we made 400 calls and we had 4 cases. Right?
Yeah.
So a large majority of this, something I've heard people be concerned about is like the time suck. So for Laura, it was really hard because she was in office in the Capitol, and any of us that particularly have worked in a citizen legislature, those whatever like 45, 60, 90 days you're in the Capitol, like you have more visitors than anyone ever. They're waiting outside your door to get in. So for her, it was the calls themselves don't take that much time, right? A lot of them you're just leaving the message. But it does like require your being off to the side and doing something. But like I said, a large majority of them go to the voicemail. So it's like the logistical hurdles of doing this, particularly when you have volunteer support. You're really looking at more like when we did it for Sam, it was a 25% increase in actual like caseload, particularly among marginalized people. Um, the actual caseload isn't huge. The calls out, you're going to have a volunteer, an intern, a staffer sitting down and just making a lot of calls. And some of them, yes, are 50 seconds to get to your voicemail and leave it. And some of them are 15 to 20 minutes. And I don't know. It's beautiful and it works, but it's not like the pickup of caseload has never so far has not been an issue. Um, we will continue to see in Nevada, but please remember 400 calls, 4 cases. Right.
Now, what is it like getting a consistent group of volunteers to make those calls? How has that been?
So in Virginia, it was great. Sam had like a really existing, vibrant volunteer network. They're quite a bit more active as far as having sessions and more legislator engagement than what David is seeing in Nevada. So he had kind of a campaign base that was already in place that was really familiar with their direct dialer system that made those cold calls for campaign related things. So he had this great network in place. For David, we started with Laura and Angel. He had another volunteer that heard about the project, was excited, and came in and made some calls during the pilot. The training was, Laura spoke to this some earlier. There is, to any other academics like interested in doing this or any offices interested in collaborating in this way, You have to be really deliberate and thoughtful about both your training and then your uh, like a standard operating procedure manual, right? I'm lucky to have lived with a foot in both worlds. So I could translate those conversations in for myself. But being able to hand people a pretty ready-made system that's like anybody can sit down and do this thing. And oftentimes with this type of work, when you're asking how someone is, it doesn't take a lot of strategy or planning. If you get someone to pick up the phone and trust you to have that conversation, 9 times out of 10, like they're going to tell you what's going on, and it doesn't require a whole lot of whole lot of training or preparation on your side to just listen. Right. So I think that's like the most valuable thing that PCT does. We're not trying to pitch a policy or convince someone of an ideology. It's just asking, how can I help you? And then like having the respect to to really listen.
Great. Thank you. And David, I have a logistics question for you as well, which is some of the work you have done is with really vulnerable populations. You're working in facilities like nursing homes and prisons. And that's, of course, very important because perspectives from those populations are of great value, but that comes with some unique challenges I've heard about from you before. Can you tell us about those and how you've worked to address them?
Yeah, it's something that we have talked a fair amount about in this office in the last few years, particularly with regard, as I mentioned, to the study of safety in state prisons. We reached out and talked to some youth in connected with that child protection program and project and so forth. And there are a couple of pieces there. One of the things that we have done is we have proactively reached out and talked to the institutional review boards that are connected with these agencies. That is not something we are required to do. We do not fall under their jurisdiction. And yet we feel that it is important to make sure that we're doing what we can to see that our work is as ethical as possible. And so seeking advice from them about things like our interview protocols and what we're going to be doing. Another thing that we spent some time thinking about, particularly in terms, we did a survey, for example, uh, of people who are incarcerated in state prison facilities, and we spent a lot of time thinking about language and about and not making assumptions about people's literacy level, and even going and rethinking some of the standard language and terminology that we use to describe what our office does. That we've been using the same way for a lot of time, but assuming a more literate population. And when you don't assume a literate population, or you don't assume a population that is primarily English speaking, then you have to rethink a little bit some of the ways in which you present your office and present who you are and present the work that you do. Another thing that ended up being very important in that study on state prisons is that we're doing group interviews of corrections officers, and we decided, based upon a few of the things that we were hearing in the very early stages, to set up some of those interviews to be only women officers. And we had those interviews led by one of our evaluators, who was a woman, to try and get a little different perspective than we might get if we had mixed groups. And some of our findings came specifically out of those conversations because we had created what was perhaps a somewhat different space for people to talk than they would otherwise. So all of those things are ways in which we've tried to address those things. That being said, I do want to acknowledge a point that Megan was making earlier. We're the government and we're here to help you is not always the most comforting thing that all communities, might hear. And we do have some challenges that are built into that are going to be there no matter what steps that we take. But we do think about those steps and trying to make sure that we're doing the best we can to get the information that we need and to get people to share with us. The other thing I will note is that in addition to our the authority that we have to access information, we also have the authority to protect information so that we can explicitly say to people, if you tell us this, not only will we promise that we won't tell anybody you told us this information, but we're actually required by law not to tell anybody that you told us this information because we have those strong protections in our law related to the work that we do, so that if we do have whistleblowers that want to come and talk to us, we can protect their identities while still looking into the information they've provided us.
I'm sorry, Ian, because I know we have so many questions, but I just want to
Oh,
jump back
please.
on that for two things. One, if you want to model of somebody doing this right, like other scholars or academics, David is like killing this, right? Because I was going to suggest looking at the House Technical Office just released a new a new division from the whistleblower division where they're allowing members to directly put like a whistleblower form on their websites as opposed to have to reach out through traditional measures in case like that got to an agency or something, right? So like having that level of security and protection, both like for yourself and your data, but for the people you're speaking to is just paramount. Then also, I think something David said that I really wanted to circle back to is how you ask the question. When we are thinking about oversight and policy feedback, this is something that just it's like it's one of my things with poli-sci that I've been on since day one is if you ask someone the question incorrectly, you won't get any information about their lived experience. So for example, if you were like, hey, how do you feel about the Infrastructure Repair Act of 2018? They might just be like, oh, I don't know, I don't really have a strong opinion, or give you some politically motivated opinion based on who it is. But if you talk to them about the potholes on their road, or the bus stop that doesn't have a cover during the summer when they're waiting for their public transportation, or you talk to them about any of the pieces of that big, scary sounding policy that you want to ask about that they actually interact with on an everyday basis, you will get so much amazing feedback about the programs you're implementing. But if we, and I'm looking at the academics, if we continue to just ask the same questions we've been asking college freshmen for 40 years, we're not going to get the answers we need from the people that are affected by the policies we want to study. So, okay, rant over. Thank you for mentioning that, David.
That's so excellent. Thank you so much. And on that excellent note, I'm going to move over to a really thrilling topic, which is IRBs. You both have IRB experience in your work. I'm wondering, number one, how has that experience been? Have you found it to be really beneficial? Is it something you dread? Do you have advice for other scholars who are joining us today on IRB work in this world? I have found in the very limited engagement we've had here with the IRB, we're of course part of Wayne State University. It's very focused on health sciences. And so that's a little bit of a hurdle for us. How has that been for you both?
Go ahead, David.
Well, I will repeat what I said before. We're in the kind of unusual position of not being required to have IRB approval for our work. We have the authority to access whatever information we need already in state law. So for us, it is we have used that as something that where we are going to IRBs and saying, we're not required to talk to you, but we want to. So as I said, I was going to say that IRBs that we've interacted with have been rather surprised that somebody would voluntarily reach out and seek their input. And they have been very enthusiastic about the idea that somebody actually wants to talk to them when they're not required to. They find that a little bit refreshing. So that has been a good, I think it's been very valuable for us. And in each instance in which I've been involved in and where we've consulted with an institutional review board, we have made at least some changes to our practices or protocols based upon ideas that they have suggested or recommendations they have made. And so that has, or even just questions they've asked, like, have you thought about X? And we're like, oh, okay, yeah, we need to think about X, and then figure out what to, how to do that, or at least what we can do, given our resource constraints to address that issue.
Yeah, I would second the importance of like developing good relationships with your own IRB. So for a lot of the stuff that we're doing with casework, and even some of this like oversight work that people might be interested in, a lot of it's administrative data, which is exempt from IRB. The qualitative interviewing is really straightforward IRB stuff. But I can't tell you how many afternoons the open office hours saved us during the PCT pilot, right? Like if I needed, we ran into a problem where it was like randomized before we realized there was a bunch of them that didn't have phone numbers, so it didn't make sense, right, for it to have it in there. So it's like I needed to change one thing, and it was like, well, do we need to stop everything and like run a complete? And they're like, no, just note it and move forward. Not having somebody to calm me down that afternoon. UNC is amazing. They do them 2 or 3 times a week. I've had an amazing experience with our internal review board. That's not everybody's experience everywhere. Again, in the spirit of all we're doing, like proactively make friends, proactively find a guy or a girl at IRB to be your go-to person, and build those relationships. Because I think particularly with the type of work where the academics and the legislators are coming together, we need to be so flexible. We need to be able to move quickly and do things differently if need be. And a 2 to 4 week window waiting on a response can stop it in its tracks, particularly when it's, crisis response or capturing a phenomenon that's happening immediately on the ground. So build those relationships.
And I should just briefly clarify that when I'm talking about institutional review boards, I am not talking about academic-based boards, but rather the institutional review boards that are tied to the state agencies that have control of the information. So there is an institutional review board at the Minnesota Department of Health. If you are requesting data, related to health stuff, they will review that request. You'll have to go through them as well as through whatever your institutional review board is. The same with the Department of Corrections, the same with the Department of Human Services. So those are the institutional review boards I am talking about, are the ones that are the state agency-based ones. We do not have an IRB for our own work since we are not academics.
Thank you. I want to zoom out a little bit and move from the wonky world of IRBs just out to American politics generally. And I know we're all thinking about the tenor of American politics lately, especially after the terrible tragedy in Minnesota this month. And David, I know that that must be a heavy weight for you all in St. Paul. None of us can fix everything, of course, but I think both of you are involved in work that has potential to really provide some rooting to politics in fact-based, truth-based work that makes real meaningful connections with people, which is a lot of what we need. I wonder if you could both tell me a bit about how you see that role and where you think your work fits in a broader sense in our political system today, and what lessons others can take from your work and your experience, who might be interested in doing the same thing in their states.
Should I start?
Go for it.
I will, I will certainly say that it has been, it was very shocking and tragic and difficult. And I think those of us who work for the Minnesota legislature, regardless of how well we knew Speaker Emerita Hortman or her husband, have all been very deeply affected. I'm sitting in right now one of the legislative office buildings, and so she will be lying in state 100 yards or so in that direction in the Capitol tomorrow. So I guess one of the things I would say, and I was thinking about this during Michelangelo's presentation, one of the things I will note is that in Minnesota, we have a long and strong history of nonpartisan legislative staff doing an awful lot of the work, and in both in terms of policy work, in terms of research work, in terms of work in our office. And that, I think, provides a certain amount of, I'm not sure if trust is the right word, but a certain amount of confidence, I think, for legislators on both sides, that they're getting, when they are asking for answers, they're getting answers that are going to be the same, regardless of whether or not for which party there is asking for the questions. Because those of us that do hold nonpartisan staff positions, take pretty seriously the idea that we're here to serve the institution, and not necessarily a particular legislator or a particular party. And that, I think that pays off in various kinds of ways over time. But it is also, we live in an environment where there is a lot of uh, there's a lot of negative information floating around. Not all of it is to use your term, fact-based. And it is sometimes discouraging that, we're one in a sea of voices out there, and it's not always the case that people come and look at the work that we've done when they are talking about particular things that relate to stuff that we could have provided good information on. So that's you know, we're in an environment where increasingly there is so much information out there that being an information producer is uh, it sometimes it can be disheartening that people are picking and choosing other sources of information that we know don't have the same kind of um, care that goes into producing the information we produce. So I positives and negatives there, I guess, in response to your question.
Thank you.
I think just in response to that, like, I think there is a chance to do some really good work, perhaps not with the outputs of what we do, but the inputs, right? Somebody reading the report may not remember the numbers, may not bring it up in a real conversation to fact check someone thinking about something else. But a prisoner who watched you walk the block that night to check and make sure things were really doing what they were supposed to be doing and going the way they were. When someone says to them, no one in government's listening. Like I hope, right? Like that one is changed. And with PCT, we're going to be testing some of this in the long run now that we have like good randomized panel data that we can survey these people over time, right? But this issue of feeling not heard is probably one of the things that Americans agree on the most. I pulled a Pew study from 2023. The overwhelming majority of Americans indicated most elected officials don't care what people like me think, right? So I wanted you to know who people like me is, because a lot of times we have ideas about who this is, whether it's minorities in any type of demographic, income, education. This is across, so it's 85% of people surveyed. This is kind of across the board. White and black, white 87, black 82. College grad, not college grad. 82 college grad, not college grad 87. Republicans 89, Dems 81. This one's the most interesting. Across engagement. So any of us here in this room would believe that people that engage more with politics, that talk to you more, that engage with things more, would believe that most, they believe what people like me think. Across engagement, low is 87, medium's 84, high is 84. We can tick every bucket. Everybody thinks the government doesn't listen to them, doesn't care about them. And like these personal, like small touches, I really do believe and hope to have data soon to show that this can really change people's idea about what government is and what it can do.
Excellent. And we talked earlier about question design. I can't, number one, let me tell you first how difficult it is to come up with questions for two people who design questions for a living. But that people like me question is really such excellent question design too. We are coming to the last few minutes here, and I want to thank you both for a really great discussion. It's so wonderful to hear from both of you and see the great work that you're doing. And I just want to end with what's next for both of you. What are you working on right now? What are you excited about? What's going on in your programs that the rest of us can watch for? David, you want to go first?
Not really, but I will if you want me to. Well, I mean, we have our topics chosen for us by a legislative committee, and so I don't know what is in my future. I know the project I'm working on right now, but I don't know what we'll be working on, next year or the year after that. So topic-wise, I can't talk about where we're headed. I do think that we have gone through a generational change in the office. When I joined the office, I was joining mid-career after having been a professor, and I was, kind of one of the newest people here, and now I'm one of the most senior people here. And so we have, a newer and younger generation of evaluators that are working here. And they're going to bring new ideas and new concepts to the table. And I think those are important concepts for us to think about as we think about how we interact and reach out to folks in the years to come, because the world is changing, and if we don't listen to what newer people tell us about how the world is changing, we won't do good communication. I had a fascinating dinner table conversation with my two kids recently, who are both in their early 20s, about how, from their point of view, it's kind of rude to call people. Like, you always text somebody first, and then if they want to have a conversation, then you talk to them. And I was kind of like, wow, I hadn't even thought about that. And that might be something for us to be thinking about as part of the way in which we think about how we do outreach to people with regard to surveys or anything else, is we might want to be paying attention to the new forms of how people are communicating with each other, and not being tied to the way that those of us with a lot of, well, actually, with not enough silver hair, think about the way that people talk to one another. So that's, I think, the future of our office is going to be the future of a lot of different things. It's going to be shifting over to new ways of doing things as we have more and different tools at our disposal, but also as the expectations of the people that we're reaching out to change about what constitutes the kind of communication they want to be a part of.
Okay, that's amazing. Like, again, David, you keep crushing it, but like staying flexible, man. Like, I hope I can continue to do that too, right? And being just ready to meet people where they are. Speaking to that, you guys all know what I'm doing with PCT, and one of my members is here. So, like, let's not talk about this being a convenience sample, but one of the things I am doing for my dissertation is speaking to state legislators and state caseworkers to begin to build our first version of what this knowledge looks like, kind of like the Fenno style knowledge of casework at the state level. So email me if you want to talk to me about your experience with casework. There is some brilliant things happening here at Levin. Another great organization is PopVox Foundation. But I'm trying to stay as plugged in as I can wherever you guys are, because I want to learn from you. I am going where you tell me casework is going. So let's stay in conversation.
Well, let me thank you both so much for joining us today. It really has been a pleasure to have you. And we hope that we'll all get to speak again soon.